Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Wendy Dillard here. Today is Monday, May the 7th, 2018, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, your second daily dose of happy for the day. And I'm very happy to report I just got out from my daily bike ride, and so my muscles are better, my knees are stronger, my breath is better, everything's doing better, all because I get out from my bike ride. That's the way I like to look at it anyway. Yeah.
Nice.
That's the way to look at it. And it was a good day for it. I mean, I love the weather today. The weather is one of my favorite weather days, so how can that be bad?
Well, how was the weekend? Because it was Walt's birthday weekend.
It was, yes, and we actually had a nice day trip. We went down to Stonington, Connecticut, which is right down on the shoreline next to the Rhode Island border, just a couple towns away from Mystic, Connecticut, which most people have heard of. And went down, wandered around. Louise checked out some of the shops, bought a couple things. And then we just hop, skipped, and jumped over to Mystic to one of our favorite restaurants and had a delicious seafood dinner. So a really, really good day. Really nice day.
Well, cool. Well, I'm glad you got to enjoy your birthday weekend.
Yeah, it was great. Of course, I love going down to see the ocean. So that alone, I mean, we drove right down to the point. That was our first thing to do. And they had a little parking area down there. So we just kind of drove in there. And there was some music playing that was perfect pace, perfect tone for the motion of the water. So we just sat there for about 5 minutes listening to the music and watching the water motion. It was so tranquil, so peaceful. It was really nice. So, yeah. How about you? How was your weekend?
I had a great weekend.
Did you?
It ended yesterday, where I was having lunch with one of my dear friends, and we hadn't connected in quite a while. And I was sensing before I went that the tone of our relationship was going to shift in what I called a softer way. Could have been said by many different words, but that's the word I used, where she and I are very big energy people, both of us. And I was aware that in the past, we both led with our big energy. And it was like, whoa, da, 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 and then, da, 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 that kind of bigness. And I really sensed like, oh, we're going to make a shift, and the softness is going to help us connect at a deeper level. And it was fascinating. We went to a brunch place that closed down at 2:30. We left at 3:15. That gives you any idea of how much conversation we had in us.
I would say, yeah.
We really never engaged in our big energy way. It was much more calm. It was smoother. And I really felt like we connected much deeper. And there was kind of an undercurrent of, gosh, we need to do this more often. Let's talk more often. Let's meet more often. Let's have more conversation, and it was just very meaty. And I love deep, meaningful conversation. And when I came home, I felt like I was on a cloud.
Nice.
Not just because I made a connection with a dear friend, but the level of conversation we had up-leveled my thinking. It kind of took me to a new place of who I believe I am. And that was something we both talked about, is who are we? Who did we intend to be when we came into this lifetime experience? Who are we now? One of her favorite questions to me is, are you playing too small? And usually that question would come out when I'd call her for coaching. And every time I'd go, I am. That's what's coming inside of me. I'm playing too small. I need to be playing bigger. And so yesterday, we didn't really ask ourselves the question, are we playing too small? We just had huge awareness that both of us, kind of in a parallel to each other, we're moving from our small playground into who we really are, where we know that we really desire to play at a bigger level.
Very nice.
So just having that conversation felt really wonderful. And today I feel like I'm just kind of integrating that knowingness that we're both ready to play bigger and be more. We didn't come here to play small. We came here to make a difference, to leave a legacy, and to impact, I guess, global consciousness as a whole.
Wow.
I mean, nothing small there, right?
No, that's a pretty big goal right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So coming home and just like ruminating in that energy of, knowing that we can have an impact that big. Now, I'm not saying we're the only ones. Anybody can do that.
Sure.
But we specifically know that we came into this lifetime to do that. And so it's like, okay, let's go. Let's ramp it up. So I'm just kind of basking in the feeling of playing bigger, and it feels good. And like, there's not a waffling. There were certain statements that I remember making yesterday, and when I came home, my normal thing would be to say, wow, that was kind of a bold claim. Do I really mean that? Or, can I really do that? And instead, there was this sense of, oh, I said it. It's real. It feels right. I know my inner being and I are on the same page, and I know what I know. And that in itself is just a delightful sense of solid knowingness for me, and that feels really awesome.
Very nice. That's a successful weekend right there, just in that one conversation you had. Whoa.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a 4-hour conversation, but whoa, what a 4-hour conversation It was.
Yeah. Whoa.
So I'm like, she likes brunch, and I'm thinking, okay, next time I'm going to need to find maybe a regular restaurant that serves brunch so we can just keep going and going and going. Because literally at a certain point, we looked around. Everybody was out of there. Every table had been bussed, and all that was left to clean up was our table. And we're like, I think we should go.
Well, you were there for dinner. That's halfway between lunch and dinner. That's dinner.
Except they don't serve dinner. They stopped serving at 2:30. It's over.
Apparently, you helped them rewrite the rules.
Yeah, they were a breakfast lunch place only. So anyway, yeah, that to me is the way I think every day would be fun if it was like that. But that's especially what I aim for my weekend.
Very, very nice.
Where I have unscheduled time that I can do with it what I choose to, and it was just a beautiful experience.
And as usual, this happens so often, I would say at least 80 to 90% of the time, it feeds in perfectly to where we are in the book. Because we're talking in the law of attraction, the basics of the teachings of Abraham. We're in part 3, and we're in a subsection that's entitled, ready for this, I am prepaving my future circumstances. That's exactly what you're doing. You're saying it's going to be big. It's going to be really, really big. Well,
really big.
That's about as pre-paved as you can get, really. So let's see. This is not one of the dialogue pages, one of the dialogue sections. You want to read this one, or shall I?
No, why don't you?
All right. It says, often people will say to us, well, Abraham, I have to offer action. I can't just sit around and think today. And we agree that your lives are underway and that they do require action. But if we were standing in your physical shoes, we would, today, begin to offer as much deliberate thought about the things that are important to us as we could. And when we found ourselves thinking about things we do not want, thoughts that are always accompanied by negative emotion, we would stop and make an effort to find a better feeling way of thinking about that. And in time, things would begin to improve on all subjects. Let us say that you are walking down a street and you find a big bully, by your estimation, beating up a smaller person. Some sort of action is required right now. Your options at this stage of this manifestation are either to walk away and let the smaller person be hurt, or to get involved and perhaps risk getting hurt yourself. And neither option is satisfying. So take whichever action you choose, but do not leave your thought where it is right now. Gather positive images from life experiences of people living more harmoniously and take them to your workshop and make those kinds of thoughts the most active vibrations within you. And in time, the law of attraction will not bring you into situations where there seem to be no positive choices. In italics, one who sees himself as a savior saving little ones from the big ones will find himself often coming across people who need to be saved. And if it is your desire to have these kinds of experiences, then continue of the thought of those kinds of experiences, and the law of attraction will continue to bring them to you. But if you prefer something different, think about that, and the law of attraction will bring that to you. Again, in italics, the subjects of your thoughts are pre-paving your future experiences.
Wow, that was a lot.
It is a lot.
You want to jump in first?
You first. Go ahead. I read you. You get to analyze first.
Well, I'm trying to think of the specifics, but I know I had at least 2 things this weekend where I wanted to take action. Something happened, and I wanted to jump into action.
Mm-hmm.
And my first response was take action. And as I was thinking, I'm just going to XYZ, there was like this little reminder that said, line up your energy first. I was like, oh yeah, God, it's so easy to forget that. And so I did. And I have to tell you, one of them was a thought that I was thinking on heavily yesterday. And the idea came to me, and it was dealing with another person. And I wanted to do it. And I thought, but you know, one thing I'm very aware of is if anybody just blurts something out, but they haven't really lined up with the energy, it's really easy to connect with the other person when they're not in a place to receive what you have to say.
True. Yeah.
And so I was thinking about this because what I wanted to say, in a way, to me, felt like it was sort of sensitive, and I wanted it to be received in a positive way so we could both be on the same page.
Makes sense.
And I waited, and I was lining up the energy, and I was thinking about it this morning, and I'm like, gosh, if I say this, won't this person think this and this and this? And my inner being said, well, here's some new information. And I was given some new insight and went, oh, well, that's making more sense. I can see now how this would be a very feasible thing that we both would want to do and we would agree upon. And so an opportunity availed itself, and I felt all systems were lined up in me. In other words, I'd made a decision about what I wanted to say. I had given it consideration. I no longer had any concern. And that to me is how it felt like all systems were green or go. And so I brought up the conversation, and it was very well received. And I'd say we're both on the same page. It didn't do anything to, put a dent in our rapport. And I went, wow, that was a really good experience, because I didn't just jump to action. Just because I had an idea to take an action, I didn't just jump on it. Instead, I allowed myself to get clear, because here's what I think I'm really coming to understand in a way that is very solid in me, not just an idea, is that when I'm really clear on what it is I want to say or do, it's kind of like if anybody wants to challenge me, they can, but I feel like I'm on such solid ground now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, I had another situation where somebody made a suggestion to me, like, well, you should tell so-and-so this, and you should do that, and blah, blah, blah. And I agreed with what the person was saying in essence. But simultaneously, I felt like, well, I can't use this person's stuff as my argument because I barely even understand what she's saying. It's like I understood it at the core, but I didn't understand all the scientific evidence that she was providing me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Sure.
And so the science was like something she'd studied, not something I'd studied. So for me to try to use her scientific things as evidence to somebody else that I'm wanting to use this as my proof why we should do blah, 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 felt uncomfortable. And as I was pondering that, what my inner being was kind of saying is, because that's not your information.
Mm-hmm. And
if you want to line up, you have to get your information. And I got very different data from my inner being, but once I had it, I felt solid.
Which is good.
And I think that's the perspective that, as we've been reading day after day, we've been talking about, make a decision and then line up the energy. But it's one thing for somebody to hear that information, but it's a completely different experience when you live it. And like today, I lived it. Like, ooh, that was really nice, because now that experience has been locked into my body as a solid way to conduct life.
Right.
And
not
so
just to conduct life, but also to relate with somebody else. Because what you did is you took a situation that you kind of were concerned beforehand might have been something that could have gotten a little out of hand. Not only did it not get out of hand, it turned into something fantastic. I mean, that's a great result, and it's one to be noticed.
And so that's all about make a decision and line up your energy before you take action.
Now, I do want to throw in one piece, and this is a piece I picked up from Joel, and I think I kind of agree with him now. A lot of people I've found will get very Abrahamish if you suggest that at any time it's appropriate to line up yourself after you've begun to take action. But the exception that Joel raises, I think, is really an excellent exception. And that exception is if you're in a really low place, you probably can't reach a high place right away. I mean, that's a pure Abraham point, that you can't just jump from depressed to exhilarated all in one step. It's too big. It's just you can't do it. Right. But there is something to be said for using action as a way to kind of get yourself going and get your emotions going and get things shifting around. So what Joel advocates for somebody who's in a bad place is start taking action. Then as you're taking action, start looking at the alignment. And as you take alignment, take a new action. And as you take the action, look at the new alignment and make them co-creative in a sense. Make the two of them work together that way. But not be so concerned about, oh my God, I didn't do the alignment before I took my action. I started doing the alignment right after I took the action.
I don't know. While you were telling that, I almost heard that was exactly what I was saying. It's just like if you're at such a low point, instead of just staying at that low point, if you just choose to do something, if the idea comes to do something, very possibly that was you getting an aligned, inspired action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Joel was talking
in other words,
also.
If the impulse comes from within
mm-hmm.
to just do it,
mm-hmm.
chances are you're already aligned, and that's where you got the impulse from.
Well, Joel was also talking about when he's working with somebody in a therapeutic context who's in depression. He'll also urge action before he knows that person has actually gotten into alignment, just to get him off the dime, so to speak, just to get something going. And then the person takes their first step and it fails. And Joel says, okay, now let's get this into alignment better. And the next step fails less. And he just keeps working away with him until he finally gets to the point where he's in a good place. So he uses it in a therapeutic context as a combination of the two factors.
Well, and what you just said in the therapeutic context is where the person who's depressed probably isn't looking inside for their own guidance anyway.
Right, yeah. Clearly that's somebody who doesn't know how to yet.
Outside of themselves.
Yeah.
So if they're looking outside to Joel, then it makes sense for Joel to say, here's the action. Because
mm-hmm.
Joel's probably getting the inspiration, and Joel's lined up
mm-hmm.
with here's the action that feels appropriate for him to take.
So he's kind of leading them there. He's saying, okay, let's get going in this direction, and we can get there. And eventually, the other person, it's kind of like getting jump started. You get a jump start going, and then you can get going yourself.
Right.
So I don't think there was anything that was in conflict with what you were saying. I agree with you. It was totally in agreement. I was just pointing out that there are some people who are a little bit purist about it, and maybe we can be a little bit more relaxed.
But in Joel's situation, the client is looking outside of himself for guidance.
Well, so how many people do?
What we were just talking about is where you're looking inside for your own guidance.
True.
Where when you make the decision to take an action, that's self-induced versus someone telling you to do it.
Right. And I would say that in many ways we're in a more advanced state because we have been practicing this stuff. And many, perhaps even most of our listeners have been practicing this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Joel method is good for somebody who hasn't done it before and doesn't really know where to look. And even if they're told to look inside, they don't know where inside is. That's where I was at the beginning. Somebody said to look inside. I said, where? Do I open up my belly button? What do I do? I think it depends on where you are, where your development is. It still works either way, no matter how you look at it, I think. Anything else to talk about on that one, or should we move on?
No, let's go on.
Okay. So let's see. The next section, this is a dialogue. So the next section is entitled How the Universe Fulfills Our Diverse Desires. Now, Jerry asks, I used to tell people that my observation had been that those who worked the hardest through life had the least, and those who worked the least had the most. And yet, somebody had to dig the potatoes, milk the cows, drill the holes for the oil, and do what we call the hard work. So explain to me, Abraham, how can it all work out so that each of us can still have, do, and be what we want, no matter what kind of work needs to be done?
And Abraham says, you are living in what we see as a perfectly balanced universe. You are like chefs in a well-stocked kitchen, and all of the ingredients that have ever been imagined are here in abundant proportion to allow you to create whatever sort of recipe you want. When you really do not want to do a thing, it's hard for you to imagine that there are others who may want to do it, or who do not mind doing it. It is our absolute knowing that if your society decided that they did not want to do a certain task, by the power of your wanting, you would come forth with another way of doing it, or doing without it. It is a common thing for society to reach the point where there is no longer a desire for a thing, and so it ceases to be, while it is replaced with a new and improved intention. That's kind of fascinating. You know? Are you still there? Okay, we may have lost Walt.
No, you didn't. You didn't lose me. My stupid me. I hit the mute on my mic and I forgot to unmute it. I'm talking away and you aren't hearing a word I'm saying.
So what were you saying, Walt?
While I was so rudely interrupted by my mute button. No, I was saying that Jerry actually kind of overlooked something that I'm a little surprised he overlooked. And you don't have to understand the law of attraction to see this. One of the most common phenomena of the market system of economics is that over time, more and more of the dull tasks nobody wants to do gets replaced by automation. It happens a lot. And there are a lot of products that have been developed over the last 100, 200 years to contribute to that. I'm a little surprised he didn't notice that because he was a guy who was very much involved in being an entrepreneur. But that to me is like the best evidence of all of what Abraham is saying. If society reaches a point where people just don't want to do it, somebody figures out a way to take away the drudgery of whatever the manual labor is.
Well, and I guess I don't see it quite like that because I think there are people who really do want to milk cows.
Well, that's probably true.
That's pleasure for them. And so, yes, we do have automation, but once upon a time, it was all manual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I don't know that Jerry necessarily missed a point.
Well, the point that I think he missed is he was talking about people. What about when people don't want to do the work? And Abraham was answering that question. But my point is, if there are people who don't want to do the work anymore, that's when the automation tends to step in. That's when people tend to develop new ways of doing it.
Or things literally become obsolete.
That also happens, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there probably used to be street cleaners who had to shovel up the manure from horses.
Yeah, that's true.
When the horses were, tied to a rope in front of a merchant.
Well, a street cleaner used to be a guy pushing a push broom. Literally. That's what a street cleaner was.
But then what became obsolete is we stopped having horses being the mode of transportation up and down the streets when we started getting motor vehicles.
Mm-hmm. And we had a machine that would also sweep up the street as it was going along. Yeah. So we had both. Yeah.
So some of those jobs became obsolete. But I think one of the other things is, like, if I personally would never in a million years want to clean out the sludge in a sewer. That sounds disgusting to me. I found it fascinating when I was watching the show Undercover Boss. Mm-hmm. There was some company that had to do just that. Mm-hmm. Like, people were wearing these, really thick rubber waders that were like halfway up to their chest. They almost looked like overalls. Mm-hmm. And they were walking through these vats of sludge that were so huge, it almost looked like an Olympic swimming pool.
Yeah. Mm.
And they were like stirring up the sludge. And what blew my mind is the individuals that were doing it took such great pride in what they were doing. They really liked their job.
Good for them.
And I had to just say out loud when I watched it on TV, bless you. You are doing a job I do not want, but it is service that I benefit from.
Yeah, right, sure.
But I find it in this very diverse world we live in, there are people who are willing and wanting to do many things that another part of society would never even consider wanting to do.
Very true.
And so just because you or I have a particular desire or preference of what we would or would not want to do, it's amazing how there are people who will always be on the opposite side.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And want to do the very opposite of what we want. So I never am concerned, what if somebody doesn't want to do what I don't want to do? Because I know that there's somebody who's willing to do it.
Either that, or else somebody's going to automate a process because nobody wants to do it anymore. One or the other, or it's going to become obsolete. So one way or another, it's going to get resolved. I agree with you. I don't think it's ever going to be an issue. But I guess I was just surprised at Jerry. But that's okay. It's no big deal. So in our next section,
I
what?
I was going to say, I think about as I've gotten chronologically wiser. You like that better than older. As I've gotten chronologically wiser, there are certain things that once upon a time I did because it's just what I did. And I actually kind of liked it. Like, I really like to clean my house. I really like to do some of the dirty tasks. And then there has come a time in my life where I've hired somebody to clean my house. And I appreciated that there was somebody willing to do that, and I was happy to pay them for it. And so it really was a win-win.
Sure.
Every now and then I don't mind cleaning my house, but I really like it better when someone else does. It's more fun for me.
I have it right in my family. I mean, my wife has a gardening service business. The one thing that I absolutely detest doing is outside yard work. Gardening, forget it. I have no interest in doing it at all. And yet we have an entire really. And yet we have an entire team of people who love doing it. I mean, to them, it's a great thing, just being outside and helping things grow and so forth. And I say, well, thank you very much.
Well, and in the neighborhood I live, there are many two-story houses, and I see, like, probably about 5 years ago, it started to be time where people's roofs were needing to be replaced. Because, like, my house is 13 years old, so, it doesn't surprise me. And with the Texas wind and the Texas heat, our roofs start, deteriorating pretty easily.
Yeah, especially heat.
So anyway, so I started to watch roofs being replaced, and I would just be amazed at how the men, and I say men because I didn't see one woman doing it, so I'm not being, racially profiling here or anything, but it's like I'd see these men on the roof standing at these weird angles.
Oh, yeah.
All day long, bent over in the Texas heat, working with, sticky, heavy stuff. And I remember watching this one guy from the ground level. He had this tall 2-story ladder with like this huge package of shingles over his shoulder while he's walking up this ladder. And then he gets to the top and he throws the shingles off his shoulder onto the roof. And then another guy comes and picks up the packet and he goes back down and does it again. And I'm watching this going, oh my goodness, you could not pay me enough to do that job. And yet I could tell that these men really were having enjoyment. I could tell they enjoyed the heat. I could just tell. You always can see the one who's like, I'm bored, I want to go home.
Right.
These guys were so into it.
Yep.
And I'm like, wow, it really does take a variety of different people to make our world work. And I was so grateful, even though they weren't even doing my roof. I was just grateful that there were people who really enjoyed that kind of work. It's like, yay.
Well, here's another story, same line. When Louise got her new office for the business, and I helped get the office, and we did it together. I was the one who arranged to get in the furniture and to get the internet service and telephone and all that kind of stuff. And when the guy came from the local internet company to install the internet connection, I got into a conversation with him. Really nice guy, and he was telling me about his experiences. And he tells me that because he has to crawl into all kinds of crawl spaces, because he basically works for the phone company, it's the same guy. He has to crawl into all kinds of crawl spaces because he has to find where wires go and where junction boxes are and all this other stuff. And he says he'll go to a home and he'll see where like a wire is going in near the roof of the house or something like that. And there's something he has to open to get inside of it. And he says he knows that on occasion he's going to do that. He's going to open the thing and a whole bunch of wasps are going to come out and sting him. And I'm thinking, you couldn't pay me enough to do that job without a hazmat suit. I mean, I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe he would actually keep doing it. The first time that would happen, I would say, I quit. I'm done. And his reaction was, you know what? A lot of guys say that. And I said, why do you keep going? He says, I like the job. I'm thinking, wow,
Wow.
holy
That is
cow.
pretty amazing.
Yeah,
That is
so
pretty
just
darn
underlined your
amazing.
point, really. Wow,
Mm-hmm.
just
And thank
amazing.
goodness for our variety, huh?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Variety
Mhm.
is wonderful. It truly is.
Okay, so let's keep going.
So the next question revolves around how does physical life differ from the non-physical, which is a great question. That's a question that I remember asking myself when I first was confronted with the idea that I had an inner being that was in the non-physical world. And I was trying to come to grips with it, kind of, get my head around it, so to speak. So, and that was one of
Hmm.
the things I wanted to know. So let's see what happens. Jerry says, what are the chief differences in our life here in our physical experience and your life in your non-physical dimension? What do we have here on Earth that you don't have?
Abraham says, since you are a physical extension of which we are, much of what you experience, we do as well. We do not allow ourselves, however, to focus on things that bring you discomfort. We are more keenly focused on what is wanted, and therefore we do not experience the negative emotion that you experience. You have the ability to feel as we feel, and in fact, when you are in the mode of appreciation, for example, or love, the very emotion that you feel is your indication that you are looking at your current situation in the same way that we see it. There is no separation between what you know as the physical world and what you see as our non-physical world. However, in the non-physical world, our thoughts are purer. We do not push against what is not wanted. We do not think about the lack of what is wanted. We give our undivided attention to continually evolving desires. Your physical world, Earth, is a nice environment for fine-tuning your knowledge. For here, your thoughts do not translate into an instant equivalent. You have a buffer of time. As you set forth your thoughts of what you want, you must become clear enough that emotion comes forth before you begin the attracting process. And even then, you must allow it and expect it into your experience before it manifests. That buffer of time provides you with much opportunity to be clear about how desirable the thought feels to you. If you were in a dimension where you were instantaneously manifesting, you would be spending more of your time trying to get rid of your mistakes, as many of you are doing
No,
right now anyway, than you would be in creating the things you desire.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
You know, it's really kind of cool that each day as we've been doing the show, one of the things I've been aware of in my own personal process and my own evolution is understanding the different stages that manifestation has taken place for me, especially in the area of Project X. So much so that I remember saying to you a long time ago when I started this, that one of my intentions would be that once I've fully manifested Project X, I would have a roadmap by which I would be able to frame any future deliberate creation. And when I say that, it's like right now, not that, of course, I've been using law of attraction for years, but this is the first time I'm doing something where I'm starting from scratch and I'm paying attention to how it's showing up and what the steps and stages are in between.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've discussed, there have been a number of stages I've been in that have been uncomfortable. Sometimes I found out it's because I was in uncharted territory, so I had just never experienced it before, so it felt different or unfamiliar. Sometimes I was in a place of distress because I started to go into doubt, worry, or concern, and that's when I was finding out, oh, that's because there was some level of resistance that was in my way.
Right.
But each step that I've been taking, I've been finding that there's kind of, it's starting to feel like it is becoming a roadmap for me. And interesting, yesterday when I was talking to my girlfriend, she had one area of life that she was kind of working with, and she said, okay, Wendy, would you put on your law of attraction coach hat and tell me, what would you do if you were in my shoes? And I giggled and I said, I'd say phone a friend and I'd call you and ask you what you'd do. And she looked at me and I said, no, no, really, let me think. And boom, I fed back to her the roadmap of what I've been experiencing. And when I did that, she went, got it. That makes so much sense. Thank you. That's what I needed to hear.
Ah, good.
And I'm like, wow, this is cool.
Mm.
I really am getting like this solid roadmap.
Yeah.
Okay, now why am I, there was a very specific reason why I was talking about that. We just read, it had to do with what we were reading.
Buffer of time?
Thank you. Yes, it did have to do with the buffer of time. That because we don't manifest things that are big, especially instantaneously, there have been many buffers of time. And I've recognized that each time I've run into a bump or something I didn't know what to do with, I was actually grateful for the buffer of time, because each time I'd run into, let's say, a place of unfamiliarity, I could get some insight from my inner being. And while I sat in it longer, it became more familiar. And then it wasn't unfamiliar anymore. And it's like, oh, this is becoming more normal. But I was getting new clarity on what this felt like. And then if I run into a bump where I hit a big pocket of resistance, the pocket of resistance helped me to get new clarity. And so I'm kind of coming to recognize that rarely, at least in my case of Project X, I didn't know completely what it was going to look like when it's done. I still don't. Little by little, I am working on what I want it to feel like, and I am getting more insights each day, new images, new ideas as to what it'll feel like. But it's kind of fascinating because, yes, I started out with, I want to create new income streams, or streams of income for me where I will be wonderfully successful, and I'll be doing something that I absolutely love and adore that will wake me up every day with an excitement to jump into my day and do the thing I love. Well, that sounds nice, but that really is pretty general.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of,
considering where you were, that makes sense. You were in a place that you needed to start general, so of course it was.
Right. I mean, somebody who has architecture as their love, they could say the exact same words that I say, even though I'm a life coach. Somebody else who, is on Wall Street and loves to create hedge funds could say exactly the same goal that I said. It's just that for them, it would look very different on their outcome than my outcome. So, I started general, and I kind of sense that the buffer of time helps us to iron out the specificity of what it is we really desire.
Yeah, sure.
And so oftentimes I've heard, people say, but I want it now. And I hear Abraham saying, you only think you want it now. Because with the lack of clarity that most people have when they say they want it now, what would show up would not be to their satisfaction.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point that Abraham is trying to make. And they're not saying, come on, children, be patient, but they're saying, you do not know that which you really are asking.
Well, I also didn't know what I was reading when I first read this, because I can remember back reading this section and other similar stuff they'd written, and coming to lines like the second line in their answer, and kind of like, folding my arms and scowling, because what they wrote was, we do not allow ourselves, however, to focus upon the things that bring you discomfort. And I'm thinking, oh, well, excuse me for breathing.
How unsympathetic they are.
Yeah, I mean, what's wrong with you? Of course, now I have a different perspective on that, but at the time, that's what my reaction was. And then they follow it with...
What's your new perspective?
Well, let me finish this thought, and then I'll come back to that.
Oh, okay.
What they followed up with was, we are more keenly focused upon what is wanted, and therefore we do not experience the negative emotion that you experience. And so I said, oh, well, all right, I'll let you off the hook on that one. Kind of reluctantly, if you know what I mean. Now, when I read that answer to your question, when I read, we do not allow ourselves to focus upon the things that bring you discomfort, I'm actually grateful for that now. Now that I understand it better, now that I've lived with it and sorted it and tossed it around in my head and talked about it with you and other co-hosts and so forth, I now understand I actually wouldn't want them to be focusing on anything that will bring me discomfort, because all they'd be doing, or my inner being is a part of me. All my inner being would be doing would be helping to reinforce more discomfort. I don't want that. So I'm glad that they don't focus on that. I'm glad my inner being doesn't focus on that. It makes life a little bit easier.
Isn't it nice to know that our inner being stays purely focused on that which we desire at all times? So when we fall off the rail, at least they're holding on for us. And then they pull us up so that we can get on board again. But you're right. If they jumped where we jumped, we'd be screwed.
Well, that's the way I felt for so many years. It wasn't until I got the idea that I'm going to rephrase that because it's we. I want to keep reminding myself, my inner being is not this other person. My inner being is part of me. So when I keep focusing on what I most desire from my non-physical perspective, I'm grateful to myself for doing that. I'm really glad that I do that, even if I wasn't aware that I was doing it, because boy, oh boy, does it make life easier to navigate. If I, in my non-physical side, was focusing as much on the discomfort as I was on the physical side, like you said, I'd be screwed. Then there'd be no way out. And that's what I thought it always was. I didn't really think in terms of there being, an inner me. I didn't really understand that concept at all. But I figured whatever was inside me, half the time they were, working against me. So that's how I ended up being in the bad place that I was in the first place when I first discovered the law of attraction. I figured, okay, well, that's what's going on there. It wasn't until I learned later on that, no, that's my inner being, and my inner being is actually looking on my best side, that I figured, oh, well, that actually provides some stability.
It does. And since our inner being, like you said, is us and constantly holding a positive vibration, it's only when we are in opposition to what we really desire do we have a gap in our perspectives. And that gap is what causes emotion to occur.
Exactly.
So when the broader part of us, the non-physical part of us, is thinking purely on a subject, and we're kind of off in the weeds thinking something negative about it, that negativity is our indication that we're not thinking the way our broader self is actually viewing the situation. But to your earlier point, that if our broader self followed us wherever we went and was like, oh, yeah, this feels crap. Yep, you're right. It really feels like crap. There would actually be no negative emotion present because both parts of us, the physical and non-physical, would be thinking the same thought. And if we're thinking the same thought, there's no deviation in vibration. There would be no reason for you to feel negative emotions.
Well, now I have a better idea of how it is somebody could walk in with waders into a bucket of crap. Because they wouldn't perceive it as being a negative situation. They'd perceive it as a positive situation.
Yeah, look at how they're helping the community get clean water. Everybody would die if they were drinking the crap that was in those giant tanks of sewage.
Oh, no kidding. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, wow. Very much so. Oh, it is an amazing universe we live in. There is no doubt about it. We have about a quarter of the show left. I think we can do this other section here because it's pretty short. What do you think? I believe we can. All right. Yeah, So this one's entitled, What Prevents Every Unwanted Thought from Manifesting? I think we know this one, but we'll do it anyway. Jerry asks, what is it in that buffer of time zone that culls out the unwanted from our thoughts before they... Boy, this is a tough one for me to say. That culls out the unwanted from our thoughts before they physically manifest.
And Abraham says, in most cases, it is not culled out. Most people have a little bit of things they like and a little bit of things they don't like. Most are creating almost everything in their lives by default because they do not understand the rules of the game. They do not yet understand the laws. But there are those who are coming to understand those eternal universal laws, and by that we mean that they exist even in your ignorance of them, and they exist in all dimensions. For those people, then, their awareness of the way they are feeling is what makes the difference, so as to which of their thoughts they manifest.
I like particularly that phrase, because they do not understand the rules of the game. And how many of us have gone through life saying, why doesn't life come with a rule book? Well, guess what? I'm holding the rule book in my hand. How nice to know there actually is one.
See, now, I remember, and I have no idea where this scripture is, but I do remember learning this somewhere in my Christendom, that all truth is was like imprinted on the tablets of your heart.
Mm-hmm. Sounds familiar.
And interestingly, even when I left Christianity, I took that with me. Like, that was something I resonated with as truth,
Mm-hmm.
that all of us were born knowing truth. Now, we can be trained away from truth. We can be pulled, prodded, yanked away from truth. But nonetheless, truth was imprinted in our DNA. So when we're looking for a rule book, most of the time we're actually looking outside of ourselves, because a book you hold outside of your physical body.
Which I'm doing right now.
But I'm thinking, I believe the rule book was actually written within us. But when we are socialized, we are taught how not to look within. We're taught to look outside of ourselves and ask our parents and our teachers and our older siblings and, the policemen and all sorts of other people. Through other people doing it, we watch what they do, and then we do it too. And yet I believe all truth is written on the tablets of our hearts. That's maybe an artistic, poetic, scriptural way to say it, but I believe that truth is within every cell of our being.
Yeah, the only problem was that inside of my heart it was written in Sanskrit, and I didn't speak Sanskrit, so it was a little difficult to understand.
Oh, Walt. So for me, I know my lifetime journey has been a journey of learning to go inward, because it was a default position that I continually looked outside of myself for truth, for wisdom, for knowing what to do, how to live, how to behave, how to think. And every time I really aligned with my inner being, even though I wasn't knowing that's what I was doing, my inner being always brought me back to what do I know inside? What does my gut say? What does my inner knowing say? And so I do believe that we did come into this world with a guidebook. It's just that it's not outside of ourselves. And so for everybody who's looking outside, no wonder they think they can't find it.
Well, it's a valid point that you're making, and to add to the validity, we were trained not to look inside. We were trained to look away from there in many ways. And then on those occasions, when we were encouraged to look inside, we were only encouraged to look for certain things that the encourager wanted us to look for, and not for other things like, the rule book. Don't look for the rule book in there. It ain't in there, guy. I mean, it was never actually said that way, but that's what it all added up to. It's kind of
like the ultimate telephone game. I mean, every one of us played the telephone game when we were younger, where one person starts out by saying a phrase or a thought and whispers it in the next person's ear.
Mm-hmm.
And then that person takes what they heard and whispers it in the next person's ear. And it's a fun game when you have lots of people, because if the circle is like 12 people, by the time the last person has heard the story, it's so distorted. It's unreal.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what socialization is.
Good point. Yeah.
It's the passing down of a story time and time and time again. And you and I both know, you could tell me a story, and what are the chances I'm going to remember it verbatim? Slim to none, because I don't have an eidetic memory like that. But I'm going to take the essence of what I heard and retell the story, but it's going to come through my filter. So I may change some of your words and use some of my words. And every time that story gets relayed to another person through another person's set of filters, it gets distorted. To me, that's how socialization occurs, and that's why the default thinking is socialized thinking. And it's not the truth or the purity of our truth, because the truity of our pure thought and knowingness is inside. And you don't have to go through the telephone game. You just go, we have a direct dial. But if nobody tells us we have a direct dial, we don't go looking there.
Which is just as well that we have that there, because otherwise, whenever someone tries to define the law of attraction as that which is like unto itself is drawn, it gets around to the end and somebody says, somebody's drawing like they were drawing before. I don't understand.
Yep.
So, let's see. We've got about 10 minutes left. I think we can get another one. And we're moving along pretty quickly here. Of course, these are fairly easy ones, but still. The next one says, shouldn't I visualize the means of manifestations? Jerry asks, Abraham, when we're visualizing or thinking about something that we want, should we be looking at the means, or the how, of obtaining it as well as whatever we want to obtain? Or would it be smarter to just visualize the final result only and let the how more or less take care of itself?
And Abraham says, if you have already identified that which you participate in, I'm going to start over. If you have already identified that you want to participate in the specific means, then all you have to do is to give your attention to it. The simple key is knowing whether or not the simple key is knowing whether you are not specific enough or too specific by the way you feel. In other words, as you're in your workshop, the specifics of your thoughts will bring forth enthusiasm or the positive emotion. But if you have become too specific before you've collected enough data, then you will feel doubtful or worried. And so recognizing the balance of your intentions is a matter of paying attention to the way you feel. Be specific enough that you feel positive emotion, but not so specific that you feel negative emotion. When you speak of what you want and why you want it, you usually feel better. However, when you speak of what you want and how it will come to you, if you do not right now see a way that it will unfold, then that specific thought will feel worse. If you speak of who will come to help you, when it will come or where it will come from, and you don't have any of those answers, then those specifics are hindering more than they are helping. It really is a matter of being as specific as you can while still continuing to feel good.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's one that I think leads, the lack of understanding of it leads a lot of people to ask questions that demonstrate they don't fully understand. That, simply it's about how you feel. So that anytime you're trying to decide how much detail should I include, should I put a deadline in, should I paint a very specific picture or should I make it a general picture? What's the best way to do it? Should I insist that it's going to show up next week or next month, or is it okay if it comes 10 years from now? How do I do that? And it's all because they've forgotten the feeling component. They just left that part out, but they don't realize it. And we all do that. I've done the same thing. We forget about the feeling component. Amazing.
Well, and I know that, like, when I'm working with somebody, friend or client, and they'll say, well, here's what I want. And they tell me, here's a kind of a generic something, but I've heard it said, I want a red Ferrari, and they tell me the year, the make, the model, and they want to get it for a certain price, and they want it by a certain date. And then I say, okay, so just kind of curious, how much money do you have that you can actually afford that? Oh, nothing, not at all, but I'm going to use the law of attraction to get it. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. How
likely does it feel like you're going to be able to create that by the time that you want it? Oh, but I know law of attraction can make that happen. and I go back to the question. Yeah. How does it feel when you think that? Oh, I'm excited about getting that red Ferrari. Okay, I'm still with you. How do you feel about the likeliness of it happening? Well, it's kind of a shot in the dark. I don't have any money. I don't know where extra money is going to come from. And I'm like, okay, then it's way too specific. And that's when I say, let's go generic. Well, I don't want just any old car. And I'd say, well, I'm not just saying go for any old car. But let's start more general in terms of how do you want to feel when you have this red Ferrari? Oh, I want to feel wealthy. I want to feel like I can drive at top speeds, smooth, and it goes 0 to 60, in like 2.4 seconds. And I want to feel that sense of wind blowing on my face and, just power, in my hands and on my feet. Like, okay, cool. Now that's something you want to focus on for a while. Mm. And to me, that's, even though somebody might say, well, that's not the same thing as having a Ferrari parked in my driveway. However, the idea is if you can get yourself into that feeling place where it feels so good and it feels so real, little by little, law of attraction is going to pick, not even little by little, I didn't mean to minimize it. Law of attraction will pick up that broadcast signal and go, oh, wow, he loves the feeling of power in his hands and in his feet and having wind blow back. Well, you know what? The first thing that might happen is he ends up at a go-kart track the next weekend with some friends.
Mm-hmm.
And he might go, well, this is not exactly the Ferrari I wanted. I said, yeah, but it does tell me manifestation is starting to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Because you started to get the essence of some of the essence of the feeling.
Right.
Keep focusing on that feeling. And, step by step, the more a person is willing to stay grounded in that feeling, more specific ideas will come because it has to. It's a law. But if the person gets really specific about what they want and they really don't have any belief system that supports they can get it, then I call it wishful thinking. And we don't get what we wishfully think about. We get what we feel is the next logical step. When we feel the essence of what we desire so completely in our body, we are broadcasting such a pure message. Law of attraction will find a way to bring that about. Even if you don't know the how, but if you stay really focused on how that feels, it has to come about because that is what the law of attraction is.
Yeah, I agree with the essence of what you're saying there. I mean, I actually quibble over the word wishful because for me, wishful is a feeling word, but you're using it in a way that's not. So I totally agree with what you're saying in that sense. But yeah, it's all about the feeling. And the thing that I've noticed most of all in my own attempts to visualize and to put myself into that feeling place is, especially early on, when I am just starting to formulate whatever the thing is, I notice really quickly what I would call the holes in my feeling process. Like if I try to describe the entire visceral experience of feeling, whatever is involved in having X, I find that I can visualize or I can imagine certain pieces of it, but I can notice that there's whole large sections that I haven't filled in yet. And I don't know necessarily what to fill it in with, which is why it's so important to develop it over time so that I can have the time to fill in and make it a more complete feeling picture, if you will. Does that make sense?
Well, I like the idea that you just brought up a picture because it makes me think of a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, kind of.
It's kind of the same thing because you're filling in the picture with little jigsaw pieces.
Right.
We could probably even use a jigsaw puzzle as a metaphor for deliberately creating something. Because in the beginning, we might just have how, at least when I did jigsaw puzzles, I would put the border pieces together first.
Mm-hmm.
So you create a framework for your desire to go in, but you don't really know what it's going to look like because you haven't started putting the pieces together.
Right.
But then let's say it's a picture, of a lake and a beautiful house and a boat. It's like, so you put all the puzzle pieces together that are going to be part of the house, the lake house, and you start putting those together. Well, if you have a vision for living on a lake and having a boat and having barbecues with your family, maybe the first step is to look for the property on which to build the house. So maybe first you just start with the land, but not always do you just start out with, you think the thought one day, and then the next day you're in a house on a lake with a boat and everybody is there at your barbecue and somehow the food was already prepared. It doesn't happen that way.
No, it doesn't. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the framework there because we're completely out of time. But it's been a pleasure, and let's do it again tomorrow. What do you say?
All righty, let's do it.
And we hope that you come back as well next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye now.